Hi, I'm John, and this is Scarlett the 4-Eye cuda. Welcome to episode number 2 of the charging system upgrade. Episode 1, as a recap, was to install a 4-gauge wire or cable, if you will, from the output of the alternator around the back of the engine compartment and over to the positive side of the battery. In episode 2, we're going to be installing a fuse. So I went a little fancy. I've got I believe I have a 60 amp fuse installed. It's an A&L. I like these over the Megas because Megas, when they pop, they spark, and you don't want spark in an engine compartment where there might be fuel, and therefore I went with an A&L because they don't have that issue. This one is a little fancy, as you may be able to see. There's a little LED display there, so it reads the voltage going across the line, and you hook up a ground wire, and it'll tell you how many volts are going through. In 1971, they didn't have voltmeters, they had amp meters, so this will tell me how many volts are going through and give me a good feel for if the voltage regulator is doing its job. I'm sure it is now, but over time, if there's ever a question and it starts going, oh look, it's 15.5 volts, so maybe the voltage regulator is having an issue, gives me a heads up. Let me show you where I'm going to mount it. Over here is where I think I'm going to mount my fuse. So one would think putting it as far back as possible might be good. It's a nice flat spot, but you have to take into account the hinge, because this hinge comes and lays down. So you have to pull this forward a little bit to make sure that you've got plenty of room for that. This might be a little excessive as far as moving forward, but what I really liked about this location is I've got this bracket right here that has 2 screw holes already. And so I think if I take some 22 gauge sheet metal and I use those existing screw holes, bend it up and flat, and then I can mount this fuse to that. So let me lift my, I believe it's the air conditioner dryer, out of the way, put a piece of paper down, I'll trace some stuff out, move that to a piece of cardstock, and then eventually to a piece of 22 gauge sheet metal. And I will be using my 10 steps and maybe some cutting tools to take care of that. So let's try to get this done. You can see I got this little band clamp off. It's for 7/16" bolt, and it just comes right out. So now this is free. And now that this is separated a little bit, you can see I've got a nut right here and one on the downside, and so I don't have to drill any holes, and I'll just reuse those. So let's take this bracket off, and then I should be able to use a piece of paper as a template for my first go around. Okay, so that bracket is off. So that now tells me that I can use this as the beginnings of my template. All right, so I have the beginnings of things in place. I have the piece of paper installed. I have one of the 2 screws just holding it in place in the existing screw hole. Now I'm going to take this and I'll just mark that as my end line. And now I know I probably will shade this off as well, just so I can see that ripple. I'm not doing a straight line because it's a bend, and I need to know how big of a bend that is for that radius, and so I know how to bend the piece of sheet metal when things are done. So now I can cut this off. I will wait to cut this off till I know how long I need the space to be for the fuse and holder, and then I will transfer this over to the piece of cardboard and go from there. All right, so back to the workbench. This is what I've got so far. And you can see the 2 holes from the bracket. You can see my Waverly line where the radius bend is. And I just put 2 holes, put it onto the heavier cardstock. For my initial piece of paper, all I did was just a standard piece of printer paper. This is a little bit heavier. And then so that I can then mark bends, and I'll see the creases. before I try to move this over to the Okay, now I've got my basic shape. I'm not sure. Yep, there's my hole marks. So I will just punch those holes out and feed it in and see how it... All right, as you can see, it's dirty. That's how I mocked it up. I just, rubbed it. So you could see how I would bend it. And it looks like with this in place, I'm going to put an arc on it about like that. And then these holes will go right in making. I'm going to transfer this to sheet with cut-off wheels, so I'll just make hopefully quick work of this, and I'll be right back. I've got my template on my sheet steel, and if you can see it, I've marked some lines and some curves. I said I wanted to make like a little S in there. Well, I've got some Milwaukee hole saws, and while I'm not going to drill the hole, really this is the only one that would work for me, but they do make a nice radius. So if you take the size that you want and then scratch it in that primer, you now have a nice radius that you can now take the 10 snips and do. I was thinking about drilling that one, and I might still, but I want to at least try and do it by hand first. So let's give it a shot. All right, doesn't look too shabby. Not as good as if I would use the hole saw, but doing the little pie cuts and then using some sanding disc, on the edge, did pretty well. Pretty happy with that radius and that radius. Just the opposite was a little harder. So now it's time to drill some holes and try to bend it. See where we go. Okay, well, apologies. My battery died and I didn't know it, so I was continuing to work. So where was I? So here's my piece. I drilled a couple holes and I put my first bend in. So this comes up. It's roughly about 1.5 inches from the hole for the first bend, and that goes in, and now I just need to go up probably about 3/4 of an inch and do a second bend, and that will probably maybe a little taller. I need to do some measurements and then scroll up and then do the second bend. There it is, right in front of me. Mr. Fuse block will go right on there, just like that. And then that will tell me where the bends are. Because this, if you remember right, this bottom holes, these bottom screws aren't going to be able to put holes because that's where the bend is for the radius on the fender well. So that'll probably tell me where that bend is supposed to be. And so I need to crease it there and see how she fits. All right, time to do it. Okay, the throat on my vise was deep enough, so I pounded it. Let's see how it fits. Okay, so it sort of fits. It goes where I want it. The holes line up. I've got Mr. Screwdriver in as a holder. I think I need to crease this one more so that that goes down, and then relax this one up and knock it over. I need a couple more compound bends, and as you can see, this shrunk up about 1/2 inch more than where I thought it was going to be. So I've got more metal, so I might be redoing it. I got the bracket made. This is round number 2. If you can't tell, round number 1 is here, and it was probably 1/2 inch too short along the top edge. I don't know, whatever. Paper bends, metal doesn't, at least not as easily. So I made it 1/2 inch longer, and then I was able to do the actual hole saw for this side, cut my stuff, put it in, took my screwdriver and ran it along the back side underneath, so I'd have a little bit long, because that's where the tube for the washer goes. So it rides along this little trough, and then I took that bent this angle, then I did the same thing, marked along one side, straight across, marked along the other side, because that's the radius. Now, this right here is the radius on the inner fender panel. Yeah, inner fender panel. And then this lays flat. So it is now done, except I got to drill the holes to the 2 holes to mount the fuse holder, and then paint the sucker and get it on, because I'll hit one more time for some primer, clean it up, hit it with some primer, and then do this one side red. I think I have enough to do that. And then on the inside, I'm gonna take a trip to the local hardware store and see if I can find some feet to put under here, so that it will be suspended above the fender panel so that it doesn't rub. Right now it's about probably 3/16 of an inch above, but any flex is going to potentially cause some rubbing, and if it rubs through the paint, then you got a bare spot and then you got rust. So I want to put some stuff under here to address that. So as you can see, I've got it all painted. I've got my screw holes put in to both mount to the car and mount my fuse block to. I was able to find some little rubber feet in my bag of junk, and so I didn't need to go to the hardware store. So that should keep things from vibrating and causing problems. I know this video is getting a little long, so I'm going to stop it here. And this covers the making of the bracket. In part 3, we will cover the installation and hook up of the fuse and show you some results. So thank you very much. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Take care and God bless.